We've all been hearing about the fuel and energy crisis building across the world, and if you've been wondering how India is coping and how much we actually depend on Middle East oil, this is what that picture looks like. A lot of this conversation comes down to one place most of us probably thought we would never be emotionally invested in: the Strait of Hormuz. If you don't know what that is, it's a narrow stretch of water, but nearly 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every day, and about 80% of that heads to Asia. So when something goes wrong there, countries like China, Japan, and India don't have the luxury of pretending like it's somebody else's problem. Now, in India's case, yes, the dependence is real. Earlier this year, around 55% of our crude imports were coming from the Middle East. So, this is not one of those situations where we can act mysterious and say, no, we're totally fine, we're built different. We are affected. But we're not as exposed as we used to be, and that matters. Because India has diversified its oil purchases over the last few years, and we're now sourcing crude from more than 41 suppliers. We also had reserves, about 60 days of oil supply available, which is why this hasn't turned into the kind of immediate petrol panic people usually imagine when they hear the words global disruption. So, on crude oil, India is under pressure, but it is not cornered. The more uncomfortable part of the story is gas, because India's LNG imports are much more tightly tied to this region. Between 2024 and 25, about 41% of India's LNG imports came from Qatar alone. And on LPG, which is what millions of households use as cooking gas, India was getting about 90% of its imports from the Middle East. That means the weak point here is not just fuel for vehicles, it's gas for homes, gas for industries, gas for the parts of the economy that most people don't think about until prices start climbing. And that is pretty much what's happening. India is coping, but it's coping by adjusting. The government has rerouted supplies, increased domestic LPG production, lined up alternative cargoes from places like the US, Russia, and Australia, and tried to protect household users first. At the same time, industrial users have already faced supply cuts, and commercial LPG prices were raised by 10.4% on April 1st. So the truth is, this is not showing up as one dramatic national crisis. It's showing up as a slower squeeze: higher import bills, pressure on manufacturing, rising energy costs in the background. The broader reality is that India is holding up, but the war creates clear downside risks for growth, inflation, and the rupee if it drags on. So yes, India is not helpless, but it is not insulated either. We've done enough to avoid immediate chaos, but not enough to pretend that geography doesn't matter. Because when so much of the world's energy flows through one narrow passage and so much of our gas still comes from that region, it doesn't stay contained. Even when something feels distant, we're not really untouched by it, and we shouldn't pretend to be, because this isn't their story, it's ours too.